The Baptist Church records also show clearly that they had no revival in 1820, for the Palmyra congregation gained only 5 by baptism, while the neighboring Baptist churches of Leon, Canandaigua and Farmington showed net losses of 4, 5 and 9 respectively. The Methodist figures, though referring to the entire circuit, give the same results, for they show net losses of 23 for 1819, 6 for 1820, and 40 for 1821. This hardly fits Joseph Smith's description of great multitudes being added to the churches of the area. In fact, the Mormon prophet could hardly have picked a poorer year in which to place his revival, so far as the Methodists were concerned. Mormon scholars became very concerned when they saw Mr. Walter's study. They were so disturbed, in fact, that a team was sent back east to do research concerning the first vision and other matters dealing with the history of the Mormon Church in New York. Although the scholars scoured libraries, studied newspapers, and sought to find private individuals who might uncover hitherto unknown source materials, BYU Studies, Spring 1969, page 242, they were unable to find evidence of a revival in Palmyra in 1820. In their article, Mormon Origins in New York, James B. Allen and Leonard J. Arrington, now church historian, report, "What evidence do we have, other than the word of Joseph Smith, that there was an unusual excitement on the subject of religion in the vicinity of Palmyra in 1820? Up to this point little such evidence has been uncovered, and Walters challenged the story in the article referred to above. Milton Bachman, however, has discovered interesting new material which he presents in his important article on the historical setting of the first vision, Brigham Young University Studies, Spring 1969, page 272. In his article, Awakenings in the Burned-Over District, New Light on the Historical Setting of the First Vision, Milton V. Bachman, Jr., seems unable to provide evidence that there was a revival in Palmyra. He indicates, however, that Joseph Smith may have heard or read of revivals in other portions of the state. Mormon writer Richard L. Bushman makes these comments concerning Walter's work. Mr. Walter's main argument is that no revival occurred in Palmyra itself. But even that fact cannot be established absolutely. It is a negative claim and depends on negative evidence, which is always tenuous. Mr. Walters relies on the absence of revival reports, but just because someone failed to write a report of an event does not mean it did not occur. Lots of things happen that are never recorded. The news included in the Palmyra paper depended on the taste and inclinations of the editor. The point is that although we think a revival should have been recorded, there are many reasons why it could have been missed. We cannot know for sure that an event did not occur unless reliable witnesses on the scene say no, and thus far Mr. Walters has found none such to testify. Dialogue, A Journal of Mormon Thought, Spring 1969, page 87. Richard L. Bushman goes on to say that Mr. Walters relies on the absence of reports in newspapers and general histories to reach his conclusion of no revivals, pages 89 to 90. In reply, however, Mr. Walters shows that the denominational magazines would have mentioned a revival if one had actually occurred. Another significant lack of information concerning an 1820 revival lies in the area of the religious press. The denominational magazines of that day were full of reports of revivals, some even devoting sections to them. These publications carried more than a dozen glowing reports of the revival that occurred at Palmyra in the winter of 1816–17. Likewise, the 1824–25 revival is covered in a number of reports. These magazines, however, while busily engaged in reporting revivals during the 1819–1821 period, contain not a single mention of any revival taking place in the Palmyra area during this time. It is unbelievable that every one of the denominations which Joseph Smith depicts as affected by an 1820 revival could have completely overlooked the event. Even the Palmyra newspaper, while reporting revivals at several places in the state, has no mention whatever of any revival in Palmyra or vicinity either in 1819 or 1820. The only reasonable explanation for this massive silence is that no revival occurred in the Palmyra area in 1820. Dialogue, Spring 1969, page 67. Before Mr. Walters's study appeared, Mormon writers taught that the revival occurred right in Palmyra, but since the Mormon research team has been unable to find evidence of a revival in Palmyra, Mormon apologists are now beginning to forsake Palmyra and search elsewhere for a revival. Lawrence G. Peterson, of the Church Historical Department, made these statements in a letter dated November 1, 1968. Now let me ask you a question. Where was the revival? In Palmyra? He doesn't mention a revival at all. He mentions an unusual excitement in the whole district of country. Could an excitement be caused by a revival somewhere near the area? He doesn't mention being to a revival. If there was a revival somewhere outside of Palmyra and the news of it had already excited the village, would or could it be possible that the Smith family have traveled there to sell root beer and cakes? Letter from Lawrence G. Peterson, dated November 1, 1968. Although it is true that Joseph Smith does not use the word Palmyra, his description makes it very clear that he was referring to this area. He states that there was in the place where we lived an unusual excitement on the subject of religion, History of the Church, Volume 1, page 2. In 1843 Joseph Smith told a reporter that this excitement occurred right in the neighborhood where I lived. New York Spectator, September 23, 1843, as cited in Joseph Smith the Prophet, by Preston Nibley, pages 30 to 31. The Mormon historian B. H. Roberts definitely stated that the revival was in Palmyra, Comprehensive History of the Church, Volume 1, page 35. On page 51 of the same volume Mr. Roberts claims that the churches in and about Palmyra decided upon a Union revival, in order to convert the unconverted. Since Mormon apologists have been unable to prove that the revival took place in Palmyra, they have tried to find reasons why Joseph Smith would have been in another city. Milton V. Bachman, Jr., and other Mormon writers have suggested that Joseph Smith might have been present at conference meetings held in Vienna, now known as Phelps. Wesley Walters, however, answered this argument in Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, Spring 1969, page 69. Before Walters' work appeared, Mormon writers claimed to have a great deal of evidence to prove that the revival occurred in Palmyra in 1820. Preston Nibley, who later became assistant church historian, stated that there are several accounts of the religious revival which took place at Palmyra in the spring of 1820, Joseph Smith the Prophet, page 21. We have checked the references which Preston Nibley gives and find them to be spurious. See Mormonism Shadow or Reality page 160. Mr. Nibley gives two references from a publication that are supposed to refer to the 1820 revival. We have found, however, that these references do not refer to a revival in 1820, but rather to one in the years 1824 to 25. These references have been found in the Wayne Sentinel under the date of March 2, 1825. Apostle Gordon B. Hinckley continues to use these spurious references in his book Truth Restored. He seems to be oblivious to the fact that the Church's own research team has failed to verify them. It would appear, then, that all evidence for a revival in Palmyra and vicinity has fallen, and that Wesley P. Walters's work has been vindicated. All that the Mormon research team has been able to do is to confirm his original findings. Mr. Walters made this interesting observation: Joseph made his great mistake when he tried to alter the course of history by moving a whole revival back some 4 years. This defect places his entire movement upon a crumbling foundation.